大家好，最近听说 Google 开发的 NotebookLM 非常好用，可以将文字材料自动编辑成语音播客。我抱着试试的心态，把波兰财政部公布的最新2023年全年经济数据喂给了 NotebookLM， 效果真的太惊人了，感觉未来主持人和主播这个行业很快就会消失了。废话不多说，请各位亲自听一听。
All right, so get this. Poland's economy, right? It's been quietly, exceeding expectations, even when the rest of the world seems to be kind of hitting the brakes.
Yeah, it's true.
And you are in the right place to find out why. Today's deep dive, we're going beyond the headlines. We're getting into the core of what's driving this economic success story.
Yeah, Poland's been on a really interesting trajectory. For a long time, they were super reliant on agriculture.
Right.
But over the past couple of decades, there's been a real shift towards industry and services.
A conscious shift. I like that.
Yeah.
It implies a plan, a strategy.
Yeah,
And the numbers seem to back it up.
absolutely. If you look at the labor force, for example, back in 2019, over 9% of workers were in agriculture. Now it's down to just over 7%.
Wow.
It's a pretty significant change.
In a relatively short period.
Yeah.
Which makes me think about the bigger picture. If you need fewer people in agriculture, they're presumably moving to these other sectors,
Right.
which could explain why Poland's unemployment rate is so low, under 3% in 2023. That's practically unheard of.
Yeah. And this is where it gets really interesting. Not only is unemployment down, but labor productivity is also up.
Okay, see, now that's one of those terms that always makes my eyes glaze over a little bit.
Yeah.
What does that mean practically?
Essentially, it means Polish workers are producing more output per person than the average worker in the EU.
Okay.
And we're talking, the data shows about 82.7% of the EU average.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, that's higher than a lot of other countries in the region.
82.7%, so they're punching above their weight, so to speak. What's the driving force behind that? Are they working longer hours, or is it more about efficiency and technology?
It's a combination of factors. There's been a lot of investment in education, skills development, which means a more skilled workforce. Plus, Poland has been really good at attracting foreign investment, particularly in those sectors, manufacturing, technology, that require a skilled labor force.
Speaking of foreign investment, our sources indicate it's been absolutely flooding into Poland. It's not just a trickle, it's like a tidal wave. Why are so many companies eager to invest there?
Well, foreign direct investment, or FDI, is often seen as a vote of confidence.
Right.
A vote of confidence in a country's economic future. And in Poland's case, there are several factors that are attracting this influx of capital.
Like what? Give us the inside scoop.
Well, firstly, their geographic location,
Okay.
right, within the EU. It's strategic. They've got access to a massive single market. They benefit from the free movement of goods, services, capital.
Right.
Then there's that skilled and increasingly affordable labor force we were just talking about.
Right.
And we can't forget about the pro-business environment that the Polish government has worked hard to cultivate.
Sounds like a recipe for success.
It's certainly working for them. FDI isn't just about companies setting up shop. It's about them reinvesting their profits, expanding their operations.
Right.
And we're seeing a lot of that in Poland, which really points to a belief in the long-term stability, the growth potential of the Polish economy.
That's fascinating. And it makes me wonder, if they're attracting all this foreign investment, how is that impacting their trade relationships, particularly within the EU?
Yeah.
Because, more investment often means more production, which usually leads to more exports.
You're right. And this is where Poland's economic story gets even more interwoven with the broader European landscape.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Tell me more.
Well, their largest trading partner is Germany,
Makes sense.
which isn't surprising given their proximity,
Right.
historically strong economic ties.
Right.
But what's intriguing is the shift we're seeing in Poland's trade patterns, particularly with Russia.
Okay.
In recent years, Poland has significantly reduced its reliance on Russia, opting instead to strengthen ties with other EU nations.
That makes sense, given the geopolitical situation. But it also highlights the importance of diversification in trade, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Relying too heavily on one trading partner can make a country vulnerable
Right.
to external shocks. By, expanding its trade network within the EU, Poland is building greater resilience into its economy.
That's a smart move. But speaking of trade and potential challenges, what about this whole EU-China electric car situation?
Yeah.
It sounds like that could throw a wrench into things, especially for a country like Poland, which is becoming a hub for manufacturing.
You're right to flag that. It's a complex issue with the potential to create some friction.
So break it down for us. What's the deal with these electric cars?
Well, essentially, the EU, they're concerned about Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers, right? They think they're benefiting from unfair subsidies, giving them an advantage
Right.
in the European market. To level the playing field, they're considering these tariffs on imported EVs.
And those tariffs, those could be significant, right? Some sources are saying like tens of thousands of euros
Yeah.
for the price tag.
And that's where the situation gets a little tricky for Poland,
Right.
because they've been trying to attract investment in their automotive sector, including from these Chinese EV makers.
Right.
These tariffs, if they happen, they could disrupt those plans and potentially lead to trade tensions.
Yeah, it's a delicate balancing act for Poland. They want to maintain good relationships with China, obviously, a major global player.
Right.
But they're also deeply integrated into the EU economy and have to navigate these trade policies. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It certainly will. And speaking of navigating complex economic landscapes, maybe we can shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the internal challenges.
Yeah, sounds good. And I imagine, like many countries these days, inflation is probably top of mind.
You'd be absolutely right. Inflation has been a real concern for Poland, as it has been for a lot of the world. It peaked at, get this, 14.4% in 2022.
Wow.
And while it's come down a bit, it's still at like 11.4% as of 2023.
So what's the game plan? How are they trying to tackle this?
Their main tool has been interest rates.
Right.
You know, the central bank has been raising rates to try and cool down the economy, curb inflation. It's a delicate dance.
How so?
Well, if they raise rates too aggressively, they risk stifling economic growth. It's about finding that sweet spot, you know.
Right.
Controlling inflation without causing a recession requires a lot of careful monitoring and adjustment.
And where do you things stand with interest rates currently?
Well, as of September 7th, 2023, the central bank's key interest rate is at 6.5%.
Okay.
That's down a bit from the previous quarter, so maybe easing up a little, but still relatively high
Right.
compared to where they've been historically.
Yeah, it's a clear sign that they're taking inflation seriously. But beyond interest rates, what other levers can they pull? Are there any long-term strategies at play here?
Absolutely. One area they're focusing on is fiscal policy.
Okay.
So that means, you know, government spending and taxation. They're trying to find that balance.
Right.
Providing support, especially to those most affected by inflation, but also not, you know, making things worse with excessive spending.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Exactly.
Control spending, manage interest rates, provide targeted support.
And it's not just about reacting to immediate challenges. It's about building a more resilient economy, right?
Yeah.
For the future. One way they're doing that is by diversifying their energy sources,
Okay.
moving away from that dependence on fossil fuels and investing in renewables.
Smart move, especially given the current global energy landscape.
Right.
But let's zoom out for a moment. You've painted, I think, a really vivid picture of Poland's economy, its strengths, its challenges, its interconnectedness with the EU. For someone trying to understand the bigger picture here, what are the key takeaways?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that Poland is a dynamic economy.
Okay.
It's rapidly evolving. They've made some really impressive strides in recent decades.
Yeah.
You know, from a largely agricultural economy to one driven by industry and services.
Right.
They've attracted significant foreign investment,
Right.
integrated deeply into that EU market, and boasted some really impressive growth numbers.
They sound like a real success story.
They are in many ways.
Yeah.
But like any country, they're not without their challenges. They're grappling with inflation, right?
Right.
Navigating this complex geopolitical landscape
Yeah.
and constantly adapting to, you know, just the ever-changing dynamics of the global economy.
It sounds like a lot to juggle. But before we move on, we should probably mention government finances. We talked about debt a little bit earlier. What about their actual budget? How are they managing their income and expenses?
That's a great question. In recent years, Poland's been running a budget deficit,
Okay.
meaning they're spending more than they're taking in
Right.
through taxes and other revenues.
And how sustainable is that in the long run? Is that a cause for concern?
It really depends. It depends on how that deficit is being financed and what it's being spent on, right?
Right.
If it's funding investments like infrastructure, education, research and development, things that are going to boost long-term economic growth, then it can be manageable. But if it's primarily funding consumption or inefficient spending, then it becomes more problematic.
So where's the money coming from, and where is it going?
Well, the bulk of their income, like most countries, comes from taxes.
Right.
We're talking VAT, income tax, corporate tax, the usual suspects.
Okay.
On the spending side, significant portion goes towards social welfare programs, pensions, healthcare, unemployment benefits.
And then they allocate a considerable amount to education, healthcare, and infrastructure projects.
So investing in their people and their future sounds like they're trying to strike a balance between meeting current needs and planning for the future.
Exactly. But let's not forget about the elephant in the room, which is debt.
Right.
While Poland's debt-to-GDP ratio is currently manageable, it has been going up. It's definitely something to keep an eye on, especially as interest rates rise, globally, making it more expensive to service that debt.
Yeah, it's like taking out a loan, right?
Exactly.
What seems manageable at a low interest rate can very quickly become a burden if those rates start to climb. Precisely. And that's why fiscal responsibility is so crucial.
Right.
Poland needs to find that sustainable path
Right.
that balances their spending needs with their revenue streams
Yeah.
to ensure that long-term economic stability.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. Okay, before we wrap things up, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, which was Poland's deep integration into the EU economy.
Right.
What are some of the implications of that?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It really goes to the heart of Poland's story, I think. Being part of the EU single market has been huge for them.
Okay.
It's given them access to this massive market.
Right.
Over 450 million consumers.
Wow.
Opened doors for trade and investment and provided some really significant funding opportunities.
It sounds like they've reaped some serious benefits from membership.
They certainly have. But it's not all perfect.
Right.
There are some constraints that come with being so closely tied to the EU. They have to adhere to all those EU regulations and standards,
Right.
which can be challenging for businesses sometimes. And as we saw with the electric car situation,
Right.
sometimes they're having to navigate these really tricky trade negotiations, these policy decisions that are made at the EU level,
Right.
not always with Poland's specific interests in mind.
It's a classic case of no such thing as a free lunch.
Right.
Always trade-off.
Exactly. But overall, I think it's safe to say that EU membership has been a net positive for Poland.
Okay.
It's played a major role in their economic transformation,
Yeah.
and it continues to shape their trajectory.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from inflation and interest rates to trade in the EU. But before we wrap up our deep dive into Poland's economy, I want to take a moment to
Redo it.
bring it back to you, the listener. It's all interesting, right? But what does it mean for you? How do these economic forces impact you specifically?
I think that's the key question, isn't it? What part of Poland's story really resonated with you? What got you thinking?
It's funny you should ask that, because going through these sources, one thing that really struck me was, we've talked a lot about the overall economy, but Poland also has its own stock exchange, its own currency, the zloty.
Right.
It's like a whole other layer to this.
This is. The Warsaw Stock Exchange is a big deal in Central and Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
And the zloty, well, that adds another dimension. It's been kind of all over the place lately.
It has. I noticed that. Up against the euro, down against the dollar. What's driving that? What should people be looking at when they see those currency swings?
It's a mix of things. Internally, you've got Poland's economic fundamentals of their GDP, interest rates, inflation, all that. A strong economy usually means a strong currency.
Makes sense.
But then you've got the outside world, right? How strong is the euro doing? The dollar. Things happening that have nothing to do with Poland directly.
So it's this push and pull almost between their own strength and these global pressures.
Exactly. And we can't forget about investor sentiment. How confident are people feeling? That plays a role too. All gets factored in.
It reminds you that economics is never really happening in a vacuum, is it? It's all connected.
It absolutely is. And that interconnectedness, it cuts both ways. It gives Poland advantages, being part of the EU's single market. But also, if the Eurozone takes a hit, they feel that too.
True. It's all about managing those connections, making smart choices.
And that brings us back full circle, doesn't it, to how this impacts our listener. If you're thinking about, say, investing in Poland, you've got to get this bigger picture.
It's more than just those top-line numbers.
Exactly. And as we wrap up our deep dives here, I'll leave you with this thought. Poland's story isn't over. They've come a long way, but there are always going to be challenges, new opportunities. By understanding their journey, the good, the bad, where they fit in globally, you gain insights not just into Poland, but into how our world works,
I like that. It's been really interesting exploring this with you.
Likewise, a true deep dive.
And for you, our listener, don't stop here. Keep digging into this stuff. Look at the data, see what's in the news, form your own opinions. The more you understand about how the global economy functions, the better prepared you'll be for whatever comes next. Until next time.